Welcome, class, to Lesson 7-12. Today, strong mathematicians can compare decimal numbers. So take out your notebook, your pencil, you can write down today's date, the name of the lesson, and let's jump right on in. So a quick review of our notes that you've seen before. We know a decimal number usually has a dot that separates the whole number from the decimal number. It's also the decimal part is a fraction of the whole. Decimal points, the symbol that's in the middle that separates the whole from the part. We very well see it in numbers. We also see it in dollars and cents, since cents are part of a dollar. We know we have tenths and how they're written. We have hundredths and how they're written. And we also have thousands and how they're written as well. A good review as we get into this lesson. So some scenarios come up now about inserting zeros to the right. So what happens if we insert a zero to the right of a whole number? Well, let's find out. If I take 3 to the right of the whole number, this would make it 30. This would make it 670. So we notice what happens if we insert a 0 to the right of a whole number, it changes the number. So I'm going to say the number changes. What happens if we insert a 0 to the right of a decimal number? So now let's take a look. If I put a 0 after this and a 0 after this. So if we look before it was 3 tenths, now it's 30 hundredths. Well, if I have 3 dimes, that would be 30 cents, and 30 pennies would be 30 cents. So really, it stays the same. So when we do this for a decimal, we add numbers to the right, the number stays the same. So you're going to pause that down. You write down this information about this little chart right here. I think it's a great little chart to put down in your notes to kind of help you with what happens when we add zeros to the right, because it's going to help us make it easier to compare decimal numbers. So now let's answer if we add zeros to the right. Now we're going to add zeros to the left and see what effect does that have. So our zeros to the left, if I have 3, so left of the whole number, that would be 0.3 or 0.67. So this time it looks like my number stays the same. So if I put a 0 in front of a whole number, nothing's going to change with my number. So now I know we've answered this question right here. What happens if we insert a 0 to the left of a decimal number just after the decimal point? So we're going to insert that number right there. So now I have, instead of 0.3, I would have my new number of 0.03 and 6.07. So if you look at that, well, if I would have 3 dimes, like in the first one that I have right here, this would be 3 pennies. We know they're not the same. So here, if we add a 0 to the right after the decimal point, that would then, for the numbers, would change. So I guess by looking at these two things, we realize that in a whole number, we can add zeros in front of the whole number, and that does not change the number. We also know that in a decimal, if we add zeros to the end of a decimal, it doesn't change the number either. The only time we have numbers change if we add zeros after whole numbers or zeros after decimals. That changes the number, which we can't do because that, in a sense, changes the equation. So keep that in mind. I want you to write down this chart as well to help you out. So you have those two charts that you can look at to reference as we start to compare decimals. So we're going to jump right in and see if we can figure out how to first do this and compare them. Well, similar with comparing mixed numbers, similar with comparing fractions. First, we're going to look at the whole number because obviously the whole number makes the difference first. Here I have 27. Here I have 8. So 27 fifths and 8 and 37 hundredths. Well, if I just look at my whole, I know 27 is greater than 8. So 27 fifths is greater than 8 and 37 hundredths. And our next one, we start with the numbers 7 and 7, so they're equal. So I go on to the next place value, which is the tenths. I have a 3 tenths, I have 3 tenths, so those would be the same. I have 6 hundredths or 8 hundredths, so right there, I found my difference. So I could circle where do I see my difference. And that tells me that 3 and 36 hundredths is less than 7. Oh, sorry, that was 7 and 36 hundredths is less than 7 and 38 hundredths. Our next problem. So now here's what we said. Can we go have 8 tenths and 80 hundredths? Well, they're not the same, so how can I do this? Well, we know from our previous page that I can add a 0 to the end of a decimal, and it does not change the decimal. Well, now if I look at that, I got my tenths is 8, my tenths is 8, my hundredths is 0, my hundredths is 0. So 8 tenths is equal to 80 hundredths. So I can add that 0 to make them even. Our next problem right now, if you get the hang of it, feel free to pause the video, try these bottom 3, and then we'll see if your answers match my answer. So we go to our numbers. We have our whole number. We have a 1 in the tens place, 1 in the tens place, 8 in the ones, 8 in the ones, 2 in the tenths, 9 in the tenths. So right there, I have found the place value that's different. 9 is bigger than 2, so 18 and 29 hundredths is less than 18 and 92 hundredths. Oh, now we have 26. Oh, sorry, we have 12 and 6 tenths and 12 and 60 hundredths. So I know I want to make them to compare all the values because I see a 1 here and a 1 there. A 2 and a 2 is 6 tenths, 6 tenths. I don't have anything here, but I know I can put a 0 here. And now that 0 and that 0 match up, which tells me 12 and 6 tenths is equal to 12 and 60 hundredths. Finally, our last one, we have a place value in the hundredths. We don't over here. We know we can add a 0. That does not change the number. Now we can compare these. 0 in the ones, 4 in the tenths. I have a 2 here and a 0 here, so this is the place value that's making the difference. My hundredths, so 42 hundredths is greater than 40 hundredths. So you can pause the video, write these down if you haven't already, and we will continue on with comparing some more decimals. Billy measured some common insects. The table shows the lengths in centimeters. The insects list the insects and their measurements from the longest to the shortest. So Billy measured some common insects. The table shows the lengths in centimeters. List the insects from their measurements from their longest to their shortest. So I want to know which way I have to sort them because that's going to help me out when I write them. Well, notice we got 5 different measurements over here, and I want to make sure that they're all the same length. That way I have them all lined up, and I can compare equals because they're all going to have the same place values. So it looks like they all have, here's a 0, a 0, a 0, a 1, and a 2. So they all have ones place values. Now, this one, the bottom one, doesn't have a tenths place value. So I know if I can put a period right here, which is fine, and I can put a 0 in the tenths, so 2 and 0 tenths are the same thing. Now they all have place values that are in the tenths. This one has a 6, this one has a 3, an 8, and a 0. But some of my numbers have place values in the hundredths, such as this one right here has a 4, and this one has 1 in the 2. Well, I know that I can add zeros to the end of decimals and they don't change them. So I can put a 0 here. That one has a 2, a 0 here, and a 0 there. And now all of my place values have something in the hundredths. Now I can just look and list these from longest to smallest. So if they have the longest one, I'm going to start with my whole numbers. I'm looking at my whole number column, which is going to start with a 2 of the bumblebee. So my longest is the bumblebee with a bumble. Got extra B in there. Bumblebee at 2 centimeters. And now I go back to my ones, and the next one that has a 1 would be a 1 right here. So the cricket would be the next one. So I've got the cricket coming in at 1.8 centimeters. Now I have all these that are 0, 0, 0, which means I would have to look at the, done with the ones place value. Now I have to go over to the tenths place value. I have a 6, a 3, and a 3, so the 6 is bigger than 3. So the ladybug would be the next one. The ladybug coming in next at a measurement of 0.64 centimeters. As I move right along, so I have 3 right here in the tenths and 3 in the tenths, so that's the same. So I have to go to the hundredths, which now tell me that in my hundredths, I have this one's a 0 and this one is a 2, so the 2 is bigger. So the mosquito comes in a close race. Mosquito of 0.32 centimeters, which leaves me with, last but not least, the moth at 0.3 centimeters. So that's how you go about setting up a chart to make sure you have all of your place values have the same, all of your numbers have the same number of place values, and then making sure you follow specifically what the directions they're asking you. Here it says longest to shortest. If it said shortest to longest, my numbers would be different because of the order that it has to go in. So you can pause the video down, write the chart down, write the longest to shortest to help guide you with your examples. And you can draw a line across your paper, write down box 3, now your turn. And you're going to compare the following numbers with greater than, less than, or equal to. Make sure you do some of the things I like to see in your work is that you make sure they both have the same amount of place values. And then I would like you to underline the place value that helps you make your decision, whether it be is greater than, less than, or equal to. So then you can pause the video, take your time, good luck. And Joseph measured some common insects as well. The table shows the lengths in centimeters, list the insects and their measurements from shortest to longest. And there you have it. So there's your chart. There's your list. So make sure not only put your insect name down, you have to put the measurements so we can see how those all relate. Remember to use the strategies that you've learned throughout the video. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to write them down or share them out. Also, if you have any strategies that helped you, make sure you include those as well, as they might be able to help other students. And thank you for another great lesson.